There's an unrecognized danger of our technology. I don't suppose it's entirely unrecognized, but the miracle of memory is not that we remember. The miracle of memory is that we forget.
Amen.
And that we only remember what is necessary. And because we can forget, we don't drag the past along with us, right? So we can get free of the past. Like, all you need is 3 sleepless nights to understand what kind of hell life would be if you couldn't dispense with the past. Because each night when you sleep, you dispense with that day. And that renews you. And so that story of descent into the depths and redemption, I mean, that's part of our natural biological rhythm. That's the descent into unconsciousness at night, into deep sleep, and then our reawakening in the morning. And that's associated with solar mythology, with the setting of the sun and the rising of the sun. All that's tangled together, but that definitely does renew us, and it enables us to start afresh in the morning. The problem with technology, is that it's becoming increasingly difficult to shed our past. And without that, you can't redeem yourself. And that is a mistake. It is a problem, because everyone makes mistakes, and everyone makes mistakes all the time. And you might ask yourself, well, why isn't it appropriate for you to be crushed by the weight of your own stupidity? Given that it's immense and that you make all sorts of mistakes.
Yeah, right.
Well, no one can live under those conditions. We need to be able to let go and to forget and to forgive. And we all need that.
I've seen an interview. I think there's like 4 or 8 people on Earth that have perfect recollection, and it's beyond just I remember. They feel what they felt on any given day. You can tell them a date, they'll tell you the weather, they'll tell you what they were wearing, what was happening. And I saw an interview with one of them, and they became very emotional because they're reliving it. And the people who have that gift or curse,
it's a curse.
Some deal okay with it. The others are just crushed by it.
It's very forgetting and remembering are very, very sophisticated cognitive processes. So normally what we do with an experience is we reduce it to its significance. Then we remember the significance and we let go of the details. We do something like that when you write fiction. When you write fiction, you don't write down every single thing a character does or thinks. That would bore your reader to death. You write down what's significant and important about what they're experiencing and about what they do. And if you get that right, then the story's interesting. We do the same thing with our own lives. Like, we boil our lives down to the gist of the story, and then we remember that. And then we're not crushed by the weight of the detailed recollection. And that's actually a consequence of very sophisticated psychological processing, that ability to reduce and forget. So one of the things you do in therapy, for example, and I wrote about this in my new book, about writing memories down if they still bother you. So if you have a memory, for example, that's more than 18 months old, for technical reasons I won't go into, and it still produces a negative emotion when it comes to mind, whether voluntarily or involuntarily, then that memory has information in it that has not yet been unpacked. So imagine the purpose of your memory is to extract wisdom from the past that you can apply to the future, so that you don't do the same stupid thing over and over, or so that you repeat things that worked well. That's the purpose of memory, not recollection as such. It's the extraction of wisdom, the lesson. Well, if you have a memory that's more than 18 months old and it's still hurting you, making you anxious, disappointed, ashamed, guilty, any of that, it means that you have not undertaken the complex process of analyzing that memory, pulling out from it the moral, and dispensing with the detail.
Like, you always want to look at what the consequence of a technological transformation is. And this is a big transformation. There used to be flagship media sources that were basically attempting to give a balanced picture, and I think they did a pretty good job 30 years ago. Time magazine, even the mainstream news programs, they had a professionalism that was associated with their journalism that had some degree of objectivity, and that's fragmented. And it's fragmenting because there's all these media sources, like innumerable media sources. And so it's driving people who are trying to get attention to desperation, and they exaggerate the polarity. And so that puts everyone on edge, and Twitter puts people on edge. And this is part of the reason I'm still thinking about what to do with Twitter. Maybe I should not use it for a month, because Twitter, I think, my experience with Twitter is that I'm wandering around in the world and everything's fine. The streets are peaceful. The people I meet are doing well. That your cities, I've been to, I don't know how many American cities in the last 4 months, like 40 or 50. They look great. You know, I mean, everywhere I go, there's construction and the country feels like it's moving.
How does one person that's watching the news, and that's where the news they get from, they consume news through media. I'm watching CNN, Fox, MSNBC, whatever.
Yeah.
How do I tell apart between the truth and propaganda?
Well, I don't know. I mean, when I counsel my clinical clients who are depressed or anxious, one of the things I've always told them to do over the last few decades is to disconnect themselves from the news. This was before the social media.
And you still believe that today?
Well, I hadn't, you asked me about CNN earlier. Like, I haven't watched mainstream television news since like 1985.
You gotta be kidding.
No, I'm not kidding.
Let me get this straight. I want to hear you say this one more time. You haven't watched mainstream media since 1985?
No, very little. I didn't have a TV. I didn't have a TV since about 1985.
When's the last time you watched CNN?
Probably in an airport for a few minutes. I virtually never watch CNN.
So if I come to your place, I know you have some interesting collection of art that you collect, but if I come to your place, your TV's not going to be on CNN.
There's no TV.
There's no TV in your house?
I haven't had a TV since 1985. I realized back in 1985 that news wasn't news. If it was only news for a day, it wasn't important. So I read magazines. You know, I read Harper's, or I'm not at the moment, Harper's, Atlantic Monthly, The Economist. Those were my basic sources for news. Now that's changed, you see, because I got tangled up so badly in scandal 2 years ago that I've been on top of, especially social media, like an obsessed addict for 2 years, trying to manage it. You know, but it's not clear to me that that's been a good thing. For like, well, I've got to.
For your sanity, or for?
It's certainly. I don't think Twitter is a good thing for my sanity. Twitter is so contentious. It's so. I mean, if you want a daily dose of hate, you can get it in 10 minutes on Twitter. You know, if I post something, you know, there's a number of comments about whatever I posted, and 1 out of 4 of them is brutally rude and obnoxious, as nasty as it can possibly be. And that's very, very common. And like, you know, people are quite sensitive to negative information. We're more sensitive to negative information than we are to positive information. And I'm not complaining. I don't have to use Twitter. It's a completely voluntary choice. And I'm certainly a massive beneficiary of the existence of social media. So I'm not complaining about it. I don't have a right to complain about it. But it exists in absolute contrast to my experiences in the world. Like, it's not like I'm walking down the street and 1 person out of 4 jumps out of an alley and like curses me. I haven't had a single negative interaction with an individual. That's not true. I met one really drunk woman in Dublin, and she called me a wanker. But she was quite the piece of work, though.
Was it
with a little timid husband by her side?
Was it after Conor lost? Maybe she was pissed off because
maybe
the UFC
she was.
Fight.
But I've had thousands of interactions with individual people on the street, let's say, in airports and so forth, in the last 6 months, and every single one of them has been overwhelmingly positive. So that's reality. Then I go into Twitter and it's like, oh my God, it's just brutal. There's no shortage of ridiculously positive things that are happening to me on an ongoing basis. I can't even believe it. But the same is true on the negative end. And so what's happened is the range of my emotional experience has expanded almost unbearably, I would say. So, and again, I'm not complaining about that because I could choose to do it differently. But some of this has also been a matter of management. It's like it is literally the case that although it's been a little better over the last 3 or 4 months, for about 18 months in a row, I was at the center of a scandal that could have taken me out at least twice a week. So constant, non-stop scandal of one form or another. And so that took a lot of juggling and management to see what was going on. And I was paying attention to social media and trying to figure out how to respond in the press and on YouTube and on my blog and all of these sorts of things, trying to learn how to do that. And so it's been an obsessive learning experience, let's say. YouTube has served me very, very well. My blog works out very well for me. The podcast, I have a podcast, it's very popular. That's worked out really well. Facebook, I don't pay much attention to Facebook, although I post on it. Twitter, that's something else. Twitter is, vicious, I don't know what to do with Twitter. I don't know what to do with Twitter. I think I go back and forth. I go back and forth. You know, there's a part of me that there's people I keep up with on Twitter, the people I follow, some of these IDW types, so to speak. You know, I see what Shapiro's posting, I see what Brett Weinstein's posting, and Sam Harris, and I kind of keep in the loop that way. And I feel a moral obligation to keep up. And I have 900,000 followers, and I feel an obligation to them too. But there's also this addictive curiosity, you know, that what's happening? And I tried to pull myself away from that on the TV news because it's the same thing except in much less concentrated form. And it was good for me. And I do think if it's only important today, it's not important.